At the start of the movie, we see our overweight protagonist, Chris Brander. He's writing a confession letter to his best friend, Jamie, and his yearbook. At one point, his little brother comes into his room to make fun of him. After chowing down on some snacks, he starts heading towards Jamie's home to meet with his friends. When Chris arrives, he sees a lot of people inside the house. He finds out from his friends that Jamie's parents have decided to hold a graduation party for her. Chris heads to the garage and finds Jamie dancing there. Upon seeing Chris, she enthusiastically greets him with a hug. They then head to her room to get away from the party crowd. Chris prepares to confess, but before he can get a few words out, a jock named Tim barges into the room. He asks for her to sign his yearbook and makes a crass joke, but she quickly kicks him out of the room. After Tim leaves, Chris tries to find the right time to confess, but once again is interrupted. An odd guy named Dusty enters the room and tries to sing a song for Jamie. However, Dusty keeps fumbling over his lyrics and can't finish his song. Chris kicks Dusty out of the room before he embarrasses himself further. Jamie gives Chris a sweater that she bought as a gift, and she asks him to wear it. The sweater has a picture of them, with a quote that further emphasizes how deep Chris is in the friend zone. She insists they go downstairs to show her mom the sweater, but Chris loses his cool when another person starts knocking on the door. This is when he tells Jamie to read the thing he wrote in the yearbook. When Jamie starts reading the text in the yearbook, Chris realizes that it's not the confession that he wrote. He then realizes that she is reading Tim's yearbook, and that his yearbook must be with Tim. When he rushes outside, it's too late. Tim is already reading the confession out loud at the party, to everyone's amusement. Chris becomes the laughingstock of the party. He tries to run off, but Jamie stops him. She asks if what he wrote in the yearbook is true, because she thinks that it is sweet. Chris thinks that the situation has turned around. However, despite Jamie's appreciation for Chris's sweet confession, she insists that they are only good friends. This triggers another wave of mockery from the people at the party. Chris ends up running away, while promising that he's going to become a winner in life. Fast forward to several years later, we see Chris at a party. He is no longer overweight, and is significantly better looking than before. A girl is talking to him, and is mad about him not taking her seriously in their relationship. She ends up breaking up with him and walking away. Chris doesn't give a damn, and just acts like nothing happened. He quickly turns to another woman and starts flirting with her. Looks like he really became a playboy. In the next scene, we see Chris with his friend after they finish a game of hockey. His friend talks about the progress he is making with the girl. However, Chris quickly reprimands him for making the wrong move. He thinks his friend is going to end up in the friend zone. Chris then gives him advice that he thinks would be better. When his friend asks how he knows so much about getting girls, Chris tells him that he's been in the friend zone in the past and has learned from that experience. In the next scene, Chris goes to his workplace to give his boss a Christmas present. His boss turns on the television, and they watch a news segment featuring a singer named Samantha James. The boss wants Chris to scout Samantha and bring her to their talent agency. Chris tries to persuade his boss against doing that, since he knows that Samantha is a nut job. The boss doesn't care. He wants to rake in the profits by signing a popular talent, regardless of her personality. Not wanting to get fired, Chris has no choice but to follow his boss's orders. Later, we see Chris arriving at the recording studio. He watches her session and sees how she butchers her performance with horrible singing. Seconds later, she gets mad at her producer and accuses everyone of sabotaging her performance. She only stops raging after she sees Chris in the room. Samantha charges at Chris and immediately initiates a sensual kiss. She knows that he's there because of his boss, but she doesn't care. All Samantha wants is to take off his pants. Fortunately, she stops when she remembers she has a new song that she wants Chris to listen to. A few hours later, Samantha is still singing the same song while they are on the plane. Chris pretends to like the song. He plays along with her just so he can bring her to his boss, but he is clearly suffering throughout the whole interaction. At one point, Samantha puts tuna in the microwave without removing the aluminum foil wrapping. The microwave catches on fire, resulting in the plane having to make an emergency landing. According to the pilots, they'll have to wait for another day before they can fly again. Chris finds out that they are currently stranded in New Jersey, his hometown. Since he's back in his hometown, he decides to bring Samantha to his parents' home. Chris's mother is so enthusiastic to see him, because he rarely comes home. Chris goes to his room for a while, and takes down the pictures of him and Jamie plastered on the wall. Later we see Chris, his mother, and Samantha talking in the living room. This is when we find out that it's been 10 years since Chris's last visit. Suddenly, Chris's younger brother Mike arrives, and immediately approaches Samantha. We find out that he's a big fan of hers, and he also divulges some unnecessary details about what he does while looking at her pictures. Chris can't believe what he's seeing. Based on this scenario, it's easy to understand why Chris doesn't like going home. Later that night, Chris and Samantha go to a local bar. He meets two of his old friends from back in high school, Clark and Darla. They are both very excited to see him again. However, the moment is ruined when Chris introduces Samantha to his friends. Samantha starts acting weird and overenthusiastic and, at one point, even gives Darla an unnecessary long kiss on the lips. After a while, Chris sees his former bully, Tim. He's still wearing a varsity jacket, but this time, he's bald and fat, Tim asks Chris for $5 and spends it to buy some beer. While catching up with his friends, Chris spots Jamie at the bar mixing some drinks. She tries to hide behind the counter out of embarrassment. Eventually, Jamie approaches Chris, gives him a hug, and compliments him. She can't believe how much he has changed. Jamie and Chris's conversation is interrupted by Samantha, demanding that she and Chris leave the place. Of course, Chris ignores her to spend a few more seconds talking to Jamie. After their conversation, he bumps into Tim again, who starts talking about how it would be easy for Chris to sleep with Jamie if he wanted to. Chris actually considers this idea, so he goes back to Jamie to ask if she's free for lunch the next day. She tells him she's available, and they set up a date. Later that night, Chris starts looking at old photos of him and Jamie. He cringes at his past appearance. Still, he smiles, knowing that he finally has a chance to reconnect with his first love. The next day, Chris wakes Mike up and asks him for a favor. Chris wants Mike to keep Samantha busy while he goes on a date with Jamie. Since Mike is a big fan of the celebrity, he has no problem with the request. Moments later, we see Chris dragging Samantha out of the house. He tells her that she's going somewhere to interact with fans. After that, she puts her in a car with Mike, who immediately drives off, eager to spend the day with Samantha. Chris arrives at Jamie's house, and he meets her father. Jamie's father remembers Chris and makes fun of him by reminding him of the time he was a major simp for Jamie. He ignores the old man and instead gives his friend a quick call. Chris talks about his plans to seduce Jamie and sleep with her by the end of the night. He almost gets caught talking about this when Jamie finally joins him in the car. In the next scene, Jamie and Chris go to their favorite diner. He suggests going somewhere else, but Jamie insists they stay there, given their history with the place. The minute the owner sees them, she recognizes them and offers up a special dish she's made, just for them. Jamie starts asking Chris why he just left 10 years ago without saying a word. She thinks that Chris is mad at her. He reassures her that he doesn't hold any ill will against her. After that, Jamie starts asking about Chris's job. This is when he starts humble bragging about all the celebrities he's worked with. Then, in a condescending tone, he asks why Jamie is working at a bar. She tries to clarify that she's not a full-time employee there, but is only working part-time while studying to become a teacher. However, Chris takes a call from Mike in the middle of the conversation, causing Jamie to think that he has become an arrogant guy. In the next scene, we see Mike observing Samantha at the mall while she's watching people and writing a song. Mike asks Chris if he can accompany Samantha to her next destination instead of Chris. Of course, Chris rejects the request. During this call, Mike accidentally presses the taser gun he's holding, and it hits Samantha. This causes her to get shocked and fall off the railing. When Chris returns to the table, their food finally arrives. The owner serves him a stack of pancakes covered in sweets. This makes Chris irritated, so he makes a rude remark about not wanting food, since he isn't a whale anymore. Jamie calls him out for being rude, and offers that they swap meals instead. After the awkward lunch, Chris takes Jamie back to her house. When they get to the front door, Chris tries to go for a kiss, but they end up hugging awkwardly instead. Chris goes back to his car and freaks out, and beats himself up about being awkward. He doesn't notice Jamie arriving. When he finally notices that she's there, he rolls down the side window and finds out that Jamie is there because she forgot her gloves. The entire interaction is beyond embarrassing. Later in the afternoon, Chris heads to Clark's office and tells him about everything that happened. Clark mocks Chris and tells him that he's back where he started, in the friend zone. When Chris gets home, Mike shows him the state that Samantha is currently in. Chris sees the celebrity eating toothpaste in his room because she's high on medication. Chris gets mad at his brother and they start getting into a physical altercation. The fight is interrupted when Chris gets a phone call from his boss asking about Samantha. Chris lies and reassures his boss that Samantha is doing fine, and that everything is going as planned. Later that night, Chris calls Jamie asking if she wants to go ice skating. Jamie recalls that Chris dislikes that activity, but he reassures her that he's gotten good at it. The next day, Chris starts looking for his old ice skating shoes, only to discover that his mom already disposed of them. His mom tells him that he doesn't need to try so hard to impress Jamie. He only needs to be himself. Chris doesn't want to be himself, especially his old self. However, when he sees his old snow globe collection, we see a glimpse of his past sweet self for a second. In the next scene, Chris and Jamie are at an outdoor skating rink. Chris asks about Jamie's current love life, and he finds out that she just broke up with a recent boyfriend a year ago. When she asks the same question, he tells her he's just dating around and looking for a soulmate. Jamie doesn't believe his answer, and this is when Chris makes his move. He tries to go in for a kiss, but they butt heads instead, causing both of them to fall. 3 kids, who happen to be Jamie's students, help her get up. They also meet another teacher who asks them if they want to play hockey with the kids, since they are short on players. Wanting to impress Jamie, Chris volunteers to play, despite using rental skates that he's not accustomed to. As expected, Chris ends up falling over a few times. He gets so absolutely demolished by the kids that it's hard to watch. During a break time huddle, Jamie's students insult Chris, stating that he sucks at the game. Chris loses his cool and screams at one child, stating that he's going to show them his true skill. When the game resumes, Chris becomes unhinged. He uses dirty tricks to make sure the kids can't stop him. He even goes as far as getting physical with them, knocking them over. Looks like his idea of impressing a woman is steamrolling children. Fortunately, karma arrives quickly. When he finally tries to shoot for a goal, the hockey puck bounces off the metal bar and returns to him, hitting him right in his mouth and knocking him out. When the paramedics arrive, they put Chris on a stretcher and drag him across the snow. Jamie faints when she sees how bloody Chris's mouth is. Fortunately, Dusty, yes, the same Dusty that failed to sing a love song early in the movie, appears and catches Jamie. She is shocked by how different he looks now. Looks like Chris isn't the only one who became a hunk. When Dusty starts flirting with Jamie, Chris goes ballistic. This causes the stretcher to slide down a ramp that launches Chris into the ice and makes him land face down. Inside the ambulance, Chris helplessly watches as Dusty makes small talk with Jamie. Dusty continues to shower her with compliments and, at one point, even asks for her number so they can meet up for lunch in the future. Chris can't say anything because his mouth is busted. All he can do is whimper and make random desperate noises that are ignored. In the next scene, we see Chris getting his teeth fixed by Clark. Chris tells his friend about what happened during his date with Jamie. Clark points out that Dusty might be serious competition for Chris. He also tells Chris that Jamie's taste in men might be different now, since she's more mature. This is when Chris realizes that he has to change his tactics. He thinks that he needs to act like his old sensitive self again, to have a chance at seducing Jamie. Back at Chris's home, we see Mike trying to get on Samantha's good side by bringing her gifts. Unfortunately, Samantha doesn't like any of the items he brought. When Mike tries to leave, Samantha apologizes and opens up to him about everything that's bothering her. Mike becomes pleasantly surprised when Samantha reveals that she's horny and craving sex. When Samantha finds out that Mike is already 18 years old, she asks him if he really has a crush on her. She pretends that her back is in pain, so Mike gets some oil and starts giving Samantha a massage. Unfortunately, their erotic moment is interrupted by Chris's arrival. Samantha and Mike make fun of Chris after seeing that he has a retainer on, which almost leads to another physical fight between the siblings. The brawl is interrupted when Chris's mother calls him to the dining room. Chris discovers a bag of gifts sent by Jamie, along with a card telling him to get well soon. Mike teases him about it, but Chris ignores him. However, once their mom leaves the room, they start brawling again, and Chris quickly defeats Mike. Moments later, Chris calls Jamie and asks her if she's interested in watching a classic romance movie that night. Before she can answer, Chris is interrupted by Mike playing a prank on him, and Jamie receiving a call from Dusty. Chris doesn't hear Jamie and Dusty's conversation, because he is occupied telling Mike to get off the phone. When Jamie finally responds to Chris, they agree to meet at his home so they can head to the theater together. When Chris goes to his room, he sees Samantha getting ready to leave. He drags her out of the house, telling her that she needs to go to a bar and perform, to hone her singing skills. In reality, he just wants to make sure she's not in his room if he ever manages to bring Jamie back to his house. Samantha protests at first, but Chris uses a classic manipulative tactic. He guilt-trips Samantha by stating that he just wants to see her grow. Since she's not so bright, she falls for his facade and agrees to his request. Once again, he tricks Samantha by making Mike drive her to their destination at the last minute. Later that night, Chris puts on a dorky getup so he can look like his old sweet self. After waiting for a while, Jamie finally arrives and greets Chris's mom. Seconds later, someone unexpected also steps through the door. It's Dusty, and he's there because he loves cheesy romance movies, or at least, that's what he wants Jamie to think. Not wanting to disappoint Jamie, he tells her that he doesn't mind Dusty coming along. However, to make the situation more awkward, Dusty invites Chris's mom to come with them too. During the movie, everyone except Chris is moved to tears by what they're watching. Jamie sees Dusty crying, so she holds his hand as they shed tears together. Chris can't believe what's happening. He thinks it should be him whose hand Jamie is holding. Instead, the one holding his hand is his crying mother beside him. This is not what he imagined. During the ride home, Chris becomes more irritated as he sees Dusty getting along well with his mother and Jamie. Fortunately, when Chris's mom invites Dusty for some hot cocoa, he declines, because he needs to go back to the hospital for some charity work. Chris thinks he'll finally have a chance to put his plans into action. Back at his home, Chris spends some time with Jamie, sipping hot chocolate while watching old videos they made back in high school. After that, Chris takes Jamie back to her home using his mom's car. During the drive to her house, he plays a mixtape that Jamie made for him. They can't help but laugh and have fun at how nostalgic the night feels. When Chris bids farewell to Jamie for the night, he receives a call from Mike. He finds out that Samantha is getting into an altercation with her audience at the bar. The next day, Chris decides to head to Jamie's house. Before leaving, he tells Mike what to say if Samantha were to wake up and look for him. What Chris doesn't realize is that Samantha is pretending to be asleep, and that she heard the entire conversation. Chris then rides a bike to Jamie's place, since his car is frozen from the inside out. As Chris arrives at Jamie's place, he sees a group of people huddled around Dusty, who is playing the guitar exceptionally well. After one performance, Dusty dedicates a song to Jamie. The song is similar to the one he tried to sing back in the past, but this time he doesn't fumble, and is actually good. Chris feels defeated after watching the performance. He throws his love letter at a random place in the house before leaving. Meanwhile, at Chris's home, Samantha interrogates Mike, asking where Chris went. At first, Mike tries to follow the bro code, not wanting to snitch on his brother. However, his resolve quickly dissolves after Samantha gives him a sloppy kiss. Mike rats his brother out, and Samantha quickly runs off. Back at Jamie's home, Clark finds Chris sulking by the stairs. Chris thinks that he can no longer compete with Dusty, so he wants to give up. Clark slaps some sense in him. He points out that Chris works with Hollywood stars and dates models, while Dusty is just a local heartthrob wannabe. Chris finally gets hyped up and decides to head and talk to Jamie. Unfortunately, a car comes crashing into the yard. It's Samantha, and she's there to make a scene. Samantha singles out Jamie from the crowd and starts cursing her. She accuses Jamie of sleeping with Chris. The two women start getting physical, but luckily, people step in to break up the fight. Chris asks Samantha to follow the lyrics of her new song and consider forgiveness. She doesn't like this response from Chris, so she sucker punches him right in the throat. She then goes back to the car and starts driving away. However, the car manages to snag some wires, causing a destructive chain reaction. Several Christmas decorations explode and burst into flames. Fast forward to a day later, and Chris is sulking in his room, going through voicemails. Someone knocks on his door, and he thinks it's his mom, so he tells her to leave him alone. When he opens the door, he sees Jamie. She wants to talk to him because she discovered the love letter he wrote the other night. They start talking about their career choices and future plans. This time, Chris is not pretending and is just being his genuine self. At one point, Chris notices that it's getting late, so he tells Jamie that she should probably go home. However, she suggests that perhaps she can sleep over, just like back then. Jamie changes into something more comfortable and climbs into bed with Chris. When she starts touching his chest, Chris starts having thoughts about how he's finally going to have sex with his first love. His thoughts are racing, urging him to make a move. At one point, Jamie hints at wanting Chris to do something, but he never does. Nothing happens. The next day, both Chris and Jamie are talking to their friends about their failed attempt at getting laid. Jamie is talking to Darla, while Chris is venting to Clark. Suddenly, Chris isn't sure about what he wants from Jamie anymore. He decides the best course of action is to leave as soon as possible. While walking out of the building, Chris spots Dusty serenading and making out with the nurse. When Chris asks him what he's doing, Dusty reveals his true colors. Dusty starts talking about how the two biggest nerds in high school finally have a chance to sleep with Jamie. Chris gets offended by this statement, but Dusty thinks he is just playing the nice guy, just like him. At the end of their conversation, Dusty leaves, while wishing Chris good luck sleeping with Jamie. Later, Clark is driving Chris to the airport. Instead of telling Clark to stop the car, he grabs the steering wheel to derail the car. They almost end up in an accident. Clark turns the car around, and they go to Jamie's home. Chris finds out that Jamie went out to meet Dusty. He and Clark rush to the nearby church, where they see Dusty playing the piano in front of the children. Chris sees Jamie and sits beside her, telling her that they need to talk. Dusty then picks up his guitar and starts singing the song he made for Jamie again. This is when Chris pulls Jamie to the side to tell her about Dusty's true nature. However, she doesn't believe him, because Dusty said the same thing about Chris. When Dusty intrudes on their conversation, Chris loses it and tackles him. The two men end up grappling on the ground in front of the children. Unfortunately, despite winning the fight, Chris ends up looking like the villain. The children cheer on Dusty as Chris gets dragged out of the church. Later that night, Chris finally decides to leave town. He packs his things and takes a bus, but the driver kicks him out after seeing how drunk Chris is. Coincidentally, Chris finds himself in front of the bar where Jamie works, so he goes inside. Chris approaches Jamie and tries to apologize, but she's not willing to listen to him, especially when he's drunk. Dusty is also there, and subtly tries to rub his victory in Chris's face. Unfortunately, Dusty's moment of glory doesn't last long. When he tries to take his relationship with Jamie to the next level, she quickly rejects him. He exits the bar like a sore loser. Moments later, Chris and Jamie get into a heated argument. He accuses her of being a tease. She fires back by pointing out that he didn't do anything to her the other night when she gave him a chance. Before he leaves, Chris calls Jamie the girl who peaked in high school, a statement that causes Jamie to slap him. Not having enough, he insults her again, and this time, she knocks him out with a punch. After getting thrown out of the bar, Chris finally leaves his hometown and goes back to Los Angeles. Upon arriving home, Chris finds Samantha baking cookies in his kitchen. She tries to persuade him to reconsider their working relationship, but Chris is too out of it to care. Samantha then busts out her guitar and starts singing her signature song. For the last time, Chris tells her to stop. She responds by using a taser on him. Fortunately, Chris manages to restrain Samantha. All of a sudden, Chris decides to fly back to New Jersey. He knocks on Jamie's door. When she sees him, she immediately shuts the door in his face. This doesn't stop Chris. He delivers a heartfelt apology that causes Jamie to open the door and come out. Chris pours his heart out in a confession, which results in him finally kissing Jamie. It took Chris his entire life to win the heart of his best friend. He made some dumb mistakes along the way, but he finally did it.